it seems like over the last, maybe 2 decades, with increases and improvements in solid state technology and in other areas, it's impacted the sciences where you have new types of, digital capabilities and electronics coming into the science world to really accelerated how science functions. So being able to speak that language and translate the needs of a customer from a research perspective into developing a tool, are really, really important.
Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the Reagent podcast. This podcast is brought to you by OnePointe Solutions, the leader in U.S. lab design and construction. This week's episode features Steve Kulisch, General Manager and Global Strategic Marketing Lead at Fluidigm. Fluidigm is a firm that focuses on technology in the immunology and oncology fields. They've recently shifted towards working on some pretty important research involving COVID-19. In our conversation, Steve shares some of his management advice, things that have gotten him to his position of leadership and taken him through companies like Bio-Rad and BD, leading pretty large and successful teams. We also talk about the future of healthcare research. So without further ado, here's my discussion with Steve.
I'm kind of curious, and I definitely want to talk about your background at some point, but
okay.
How does the biz dev team actually interface with research and all that stuff at Fluidigm?
Yeah, so I've got strategic marketing. I have business development and corporate strategy as well. So the product marketing team generally is going to be responsible for the product roadmap. So I'm responsible for identifying what types of products we need to invest in as an organization to bring to market. And so the product marketing team will typically work on some of the organic strategy and inorganic strategy. Biz dev will typically look at partnership, acquisition, and other types of collaborations. And the interaction with R&D is typically around identifying what we need to build, and then the R&D team trying to figure out how to build it to the capabilities necessary for utility.
Got it. So you're kind of guiding that in a sense.
Yeah. So it's a real partnership between kind of the business side and the technical teams to basically bring to market what the customers want and need to execute on their research.
Interesting. And do you guys have like a separate branding arm or something like that that's in its own area?
Yeah, it's like a corporate marketing team. So
Gotcha.
The corporate marketing team does all like the creatives, the messaging. They do a lot of the lead generation, our digital strategy. So that's like another piece of my organization that is part of the puzzle. So they typically focus on the go-to-market, outbound, downstream communications. It's kind of a nice group that spans a lot of what the organization does.
Interesting. That's really fascinating. Anyway, we skipped the intro, so thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
I would love to know, what first inspired you as a business leader now to get into the sciences?
So I've been in the sciences really my whole professional career, and throughout my university time, I was in the sciences as well. My inspiration really came, I think, at a really young age. From my family. My mother specifically was very much into the natural sciences, nature, wildlife, and so I spent a lot of time outside. Whether where I grew up in Fort Worth, or whether it was in California up in the Sierras or at the beach. It seemed like every time we were outside, it was a lesson in what plants and animals existed, rock formations, and how they came to be. And so that was, at that age, very age appropriate. You're not getting into molecular biology when you're, 7.
For sure.
But some of the principles of understanding, nature and science from that perspective, for me, was really formative in terms of, determining my interests as I got older.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a kind of similar upbringing. I went to this preschool called the Sprout House in New Jersey, and there was like every Tuesday would be a nature trip, and they'd kind of, teach those values and everything. It didn't take me into a career there, but yeah, it was similar like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So you've taken kind of an interesting path, through Bio-Rad, through BD. What kind of core management principles would you say have guided you through your career and your growth so far?
I think creativity and risk taking, and making sure that whether I was independent as an independent contributor or whether I had teams, making sure that the teams understood that sometimes in order to be successful, you need to take risks, and that through failure, which is inevitable, you learn through your failures to apply to your next experience to improve. And so for me, it's a constant series of improving upon what you've done, by not just celebrating your successes, but learning from your failures.
Definitely. And just so I want to be granular for people listening, like how many people are on your team that you oversee, and like how many layers of management are there?
Right now, I want to say there's around 23 or 24 people on the team, and about 3 layers of management on my current team.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty great. I'm a new manager myself, and I'm constantly learning. This is like my first team. I have three direct reports, so that's big for me in my career. And I'm doing a lot of learning myself. So one thing I really wanted to ask you is, as a manager managing an organization like that, how do you assess how you're doing as a manager?
Early on, I assessed how I was doing as a manager by always taking account of what I'm not doing, and to make sure that I'm not trying to do more than I need to, because I have a team for a reason. Right? I have a team to do the stuff. So letting go of doing the stuff as a new manager can be one of the most challenging things, because as an independent contributor and you're working through different organizations, you're always accountable for producing things. As a primary role, and as a manager, you still have to do that to an extent, but you have to really shift a lot of the emphasis on enabling your team to produce those elements. So, for me, there was always a check of, okay, what am I doing right now that I should not be doing, that I need to enable my team to do and to learn and to build and grow. Because ultimately, if you have aspiration, you want to move to the next level, and you're going to need someone to step into that role. My philosophy has always been seeking to build people up to replace myself someday, whether I stay within the organization or I don't. For any organization, they will value managers that have that philosophy.
Yeah, that's great. And I find myself doing that a lot, where I'm thinking, oh my God, my to-do list is so long, and then I realize half of this stuff I'm just not delegating properly.
Yeah, you're like, wait, I got a team.
Exactly, it's that mindset shift. So when you look at like your field and how you approach your market, how do you see, and maybe this might be hard to answer because you've spent your career in the life sciences. How do you see, the field of business development in life sciences differ from other industries? It could be software or consumer goods or something like that have a more traditional focus in that area.
I mean, a lot of the business principles are the same with what you're looking for, right? You're typically looking for opportunities that will generate growth, revenue growth for the company, profitable, sustainable growth. You're looking for, new opportunities in new segments. You're typically looking for a lot of the same things. I think from a skill set perspective, the ability to understand the science and the language of science becomes pretty important.
Sure.
Because a lot of what research is changing really rapidly. It seems like over the last maybe 2 decades, with increases and improvements in solid state technology and in other areas, it's impacted the sciences, where you have new types of digital capabilities and electronics coming into the science world to really accelerated how science functions. So being able to speak that language and translate the needs of a customer from a research perspective into developing a tool, are really, really important.
Interesting. And you mentioned solid state and among some other things. Can you go into a little detail on kind of what that field is and some of these things that you're referring to?
Yeah. So one of the best examples I have is a decade ago, we wanted to build a little device that would image-based that would count cells on a slide. The prior process was using a microscope in your eyeballs on a slide. And
wow.
Thought, well, wouldn't it be great if you could just put this little slide into a device and it would just count it all for you? And what really enabled us to create that product at the right price point was CMOS technology. So CMOS is an imaging chip. I don't know what it stands for because I'm not an engineer. But the increase in use of these chips in cell phones brought the price and the quality of those chips, the price down and the quality way up to the point that we could actually build this device. Because otherwise, it would have just been way too expensive had that technology not been used in a consumer products or a consumer good like that.
Interesting. Yeah. So the little cross influence of like some outside industries.
That's one example. I mean, another example is lasers. I mean, lasers in cytometry used to be, $5,000 for a laser, and now they're a whole lot less expensive. So just the access of sophisticated tools for research has gotten much greater as some of these solid state technologies have gotten a whole lot less expensive.
And do you have like a single market that you are designing these products for at Fluidigm?
We have our primary market is people in oncology and immuno-oncology research. So that's traditionally where the business has focused its technology, because our technology looks at immune cells and characterizes immune function within whether it be mouse or human samples. And right now, though, that technology actually really applies to COVID research. So it's actually been an easy shift of that technology to help in that effort to really understand how that COVID infection can affect the immune system. Our other technology in microfluidics has been traditionally used in agriculture, genotyping, some oncology, and now it is also being pivoted into COVID diagnostics as well. So
wow,
that's
another second technology.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of these technologies can be, just by the assays you put on them, shifted into new utilities. And I think for us, there's a bit of a mix of, we understand that the world needs increased testing for this. We understand that the world needs to really better handle how to treat patients that have contracted this virus. From a business perspective, also, it's we have to try to keep some business continuity going and manage our business to stay generating money on the top line.
Yeah, for sure. And so I expect that must have had somewhat of a shift in your engineering and R&D efforts, once this kind of kicked off in March. Like, how did you feel that?
We felt it through, well, there's a couple of different things. It's one, we want to keep our employees safe. So, there's an immediate challenge in, how do we work remote? How do we keep the people safe who do, our essential workers that do need to continue to work on site? And then how do we, and what skills do we need to adjust what we have today to meet the challenges of this new, new threat, for lack of a better word. And fortunately, we have an incredibly talented R&D team that in very little time was actually able to shift 2 of our primary products to work on this problem. One, on the diagnostic side, just to detect if a person is infected with the virus, and then on the recovery side, understanding why different people have different symptoms, more severe symptoms than others. And eventually, how might we look to treat people differentially based on understanding how the COVID infection progressed in certain populations versus others.
Interesting. So throughout all this, how has your management style changed or been impacted by like the crisis, and how might you compare that to maybe previous crises we've had or previous shifts in the market that you've experienced?
Yeah, I was managing a pretty good sized strategic marketing team in the 2008 financial crisis, which at that time was probably the biggest challenge I've ever seen or gone through as a manager. And at the time, it felt like a complete disaster. We didn't know what was happening with funding. the tax revenue that funds a lot of research in the U.S. was being reduced. So we did a lot of work trying to figure out how to balance opportunity globally, because while the U.S. might be suffering from a lack of funding, other parts of the world might be investing still. So it was really a bit of a shift in geography, and a focus on products that we felt would continue to do well despite some of the reductions in research funding we saw globally. This experience has been so much different.
Yeah. People didn't have to work remote in 2008, I'm sure.
No, they didn't. There was that. People are afraid for their safety. They're afraid for their family's safety. So there's a much stronger personal component to it. That as a manager, I've never had to so constantly make sure that people personally are feeling okay. Not just professionally, but
Sure.
And also being locked up in your house and not seeing people, for a long time, can bring certain challenges in communication. So, for me, it really reinforced the importance of communication, the importance of face-to-face communication, because, I would be on video calls and I'd never put my picture up. I was like, well, why? I really realized how important it is now to do that. So that's a new best practice for me.
Yeah. I think we're all building a new set of social skills.
I think so. No, even just knowing where to stare on the computer. Yeah. And it's I think the communication piece has been the most important, and just making sure there's a little bit more levity and kind of taking the time to be social with people as well. I think that definitely is important too, because you lose that kind of hallway banter and the coffee room talk.
Yes, for sure.
The first month just evaporated, and I don't think people knew how to replace it.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. I mean, the in-person component it's definitely needed. I don't think I could just truly work remote for my whole career.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do that like some people can.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
One thing I spotted on your LinkedIn that I really want to ask about is your volunteering, I guess, at the NSF, the National Science Foundation.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what's the background behind that? How did you get involved, and what is that mentorship role like?
Yeah, so it was an opportunity that I came across with some old colleagues from Bio-Rad. So they had gotten involved. One of them is I think a regional coordinator for the program. Mm-hmm. And the other one is one of the instructors that he does kind of part-time. So he actually instructs the course. So I wanted to get a little bit closer to startup companies, companies that have emerging technology, typically heavily science-leaning, but need to understand a bit more about how to kind of create messaging around their product, or whether they even have a viable product, which is some of the most exciting work, in my opinion, for me.
Yeah.
And so the program itself brings together, and I forget how many years they've been doing this, but they bring together maybe somewhere between 20 and 25 different teams. Typically, they'll have a technology. You'll have a technical lead, a kind of a group leader, and then a mentor, which was me.
Interesting.
So each team had a mentor.
Are these students or current PhDs or?
Oh, some are students, some are government researchers. On my team, I had 2 recent Cal graduates that were engineers, and a heart surgeon, a resident heart surgeon.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
So, and they were putting together, they wanted to understand if this technology that they were creating had use and utility, and they had a great story. But we really needed to go and understand if what they had was of value, and how they were, marketing it to people resonated. And the program itself is focused entirely on the goal of interviewing 110 different types of potential customers to talk about your technology, what it can do, and then get their feedback.
Interesting.
And you're coming back, you go out with a premise of what you think the value is, and then over time you determine the goal is to fail it out, right? To determine, maybe this product doesn't work. With the very, very few, changing their value offer to their target market, or maybe even changing their target market, and eventually, having a plan going forward to commercialize their technology.
That's cool. And just I'm curious how it was all orchestrated. Like, what was the process like of getting these 110? Were you kind of posting classifieds? Was it within people's networks and things? Like, how did that work?
It was in person. So you're given a budget to help to travel. I can't remember. It was a small amount, but to get you to different places, to get to conferences and such. But as an example, the first day we show up and we have about maybe 3 hours of meetings, and then they tell us go find customers to talk to. We're at a hotel, and they're like, all right, now go find customers. So for us, we went straight to UCSF Medical Center and just started walking into the hospital to find what are they, interventional cardiologists, which I didn't even know was the type of doctor. And so, just walking the floors looking for doctors to talk to, and healthcare workers and nurses, and just, stop and, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? And so it was really just, kind of ad hoc. It's
like guerrilla market research. It sounds cool.
Completely. Yeah. It was really fun. Really fun.
Awesome.
And part of the challenge is just some people are very uncomfortable approaching people to talk to them about anything. So, that was, but
I'd probably have a hard time with that.
By and large, most people we talked to loved hearing about it. And, we're pretty, pretty nice. So you're not just soliciting some random product. You're soliciting like, hey, this is a life-changing technology that could help the world. Oh yeah. And some even like, hey, what did you ever think about this? They jump into offering, improvements, which was really great too.
That's awesome. So I think this is probably a good time to just wrap up. I mean, appreciate kind of everything you've shared so far. And so 2 questions I like to ask. The first one is, what's a book you've read recently? Could be for like career development or just for pleasure that has left a good impact on you.
I haven't read a good pleasure book in a while. Probably the last one I read was probably a children's book to one of my kids.
Nice. Those can count. So
they do have lessons in them usually, but I think that the book I'm in the middle of is The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. I think it's a pretty well-read book. But it really just talks about approaching business not from a gaming standpoint, not of there's a conclusion. That you need to take a mindset that business in every industry is infinite. It's going to go on and on and on. And from a management perspective, I look at our markets as science and research will never end. We're never going to know everything about everything. So we have to constantly be iterating and improving and thinking about what's next, and teaching our teams to have the same mindset of when you find success in a product or technology, don't plant the flag and say, yeah, I did it. You got to be thinking about the competitive environment, who else is out there that are chasing the same problems, what they might be doing to improve. It's a pretty fascinating book, and aligns with how I've approached the market for a long time. So in some respects, a good refresher, but there's some good new lessons that I've picked up along the way so far.
That's great. So just never stop climbing.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Cool. And then the second question is just a tool you've picked up. So it could be a software that you use at work, could be something in your house like a Peloton bike, that's something that's brought you value recently.
This is going to sound funny. I recently bought a rice cooker.
Ooh, that's a good one. That's like underdog.
It's a nice one, and it cooks stone ground oatmeal too. It's pretty fancy, and it's got like fuzzy logic, so it'll do like sushi rice or wild rice, long grain. I mean, it's nice, and it cleans up real easy. So
love it.
Yeah. So that's actually, I've not cooked so much rice in the last 2 weeks than I have in the last 2 years.
Amen. It's probably very healthy. So
yeah,
good investment.
Yep.
Cool. So just parting words. Is there anything that you'd like to share or plug or highlight?
That's a good question. I think If anything, I think, in my technology space or my business, we focus a lot on technology development for healthcare, right? For improving
Yeah.
the human condition, people say. And while our technologies aren't on the front line, we know a lot of what we do affects how patients are treated or diagnosed. And, it's really great to see that happen, to watch that happen. But I think people don't fully understand just how much those frontline workers put their life on the line. Take the COVID situation really just as a topical example. The things that frontline health workers deal with beyond that are pretty astounding in terms of the type of people who work into emergency or the type of situations they find themselves in recovery. So, for me, I think just a shout out to healthcare workers, whether they're here in California, they're in Austin, anywhere in the world. Great work. Love what everyone does, and we really appreciate it.
Ditto to that.